you hear people talking about immigration as a threat or as an American value here in this conversation. What does this mean for some of the very heated races that we are seeing? What are you seeing out there in your poll numbers?
Well, what you heard from the gentleman, that description of gang members, is something that we're hearing in the polling from the president's supporters, from Republicans, whether they live 20 miles from the border or 2,000 miles from it. We asked them to describe who it was that they thought was coming across the border and why. And you did see the president's supporters more likely to say that at least some were gang members and criminals, but folks on the left and Democrats, a lot of independents, describe them as people looking for work, describe them as people who are fleeing violence. Those very different conceptions affect what you think of policy, because that affects what you think of the people who are impacted by it. And then we see these big differences on what happens next. So to your point about what happens in the midterms, you've got big differences on whether the government should prioritize reunifying the families who've been separated, with Republicans saying it's a lower priority, Democrats saying it's a higher one, and Republicans saying the president has fixed this problem, Democrats saying that he hasn't, and there are more Democrats who say it will be a factor in their vote in the midterms coming up.
Ed, when Pete was talking about MS-13 and feeling threatened, that's not a huge issue in Arizona.
No.
Where is that sense coming from?
He told us, he made clear early on in the conversation that he, frankly, watches a lot of Fox News and listens to talk radio. And I think it seems that some of it is coming from that. He used to live in California and says he saw communities in Southern California transform over several years. It's an experience that mirrors what a lot of the president's supporters and what a lot of people who fear these, illegal immigrants have said in the past. And what I found most striking, though, is that he expressed less concern, I think, for the plight of these families than others at the table, and that is actually reflected in the polling this week. There's a sizable chunk of Republicans or supporters of the president who say they are less concerned about the plight of those families and more concerned about enforcing immigration policy. I think there are other people in this country who would be quite shocked by that because they see keeping families together as a more American ideal. But it's an incredibly emotional issue for people out there because they're on the border, and it's something that has dominated especially local politics for several years.
And the president thinks this is a good issue to run on. He said that going into November. But what about Texas, Arizona, Florida, some of these very competitive races?
Right. In Texas, the Democrats would like to try to pick up a Senate seat, but the incumbent senator, Ted Cruz, we find in our polling, has a substantial lead. That's a high hurdle for Democrats to get over. In Arizona, another border state with a hot Senate race, our polling finds that the Democrats have a very good chance to pick up a seat, but they may have to trade it for Florida. And that's another place where we poll where it looks like the incumbent Senator Bill Nelson is in trouble. Governor Rick Scott is running against him and has a slight lead. But, in all of this, we see these big differences in when people describe the way in which we ought to approach the immigration problem between the idea of toughness and the idea of kindness and what kinds of values that represents. We've got people who say that because they've committed a crime, they have to be dealt with in a tough and very punitive manner. And we've got people who say that being kind reflects American values. Those big differences seem like there's a massive gap between us that I think will have to be borne out as these races go forward.
So, Ed, apart from the emotional, tell me about the economic. What did you hear from voters?
Yeah, this actually was quite revealing because, Republicans have been saying that they plan to campaign on the strength of the economy, on the success of their tax reform plan. They had very different opinions, divided opinions on immigration, but when it came to the economy, look at how much they agreed things are actually doing all right. To borrow and adapt a phrase that Ronald Reagan once used, do you feel you're better off than you were 2 years ago?
It's tough to answer. I would say yeah. That I am. Just having looked at how the S&P 500 has been trading, like NASDAQ and things like that, I would say that I am up.
Karine?
I'm better off than 2 years ago. Yes, the tax plan has put more money on my paycheck.
So you've seen a difference?
Yes.
Christina?
Personally, in the past 2 years, I've seen an increase in wage because I switched jobs, right? So I'm chasing another job to make more money as a salary base. I'm not an economist, but if I'm seeing gas prices go up, I'm seeing mortgage rates go up, that concerns me.
Pete?
I'm satisfied with the economy. It's going on. It's going to get better. It's upward bound.
So, Anthony, are people going to vote their pocketbooks and put aside the immigration upset?
Well, across the board, people do say the economy is good. They say their local economy is good. They think the national economy is good. It's true that optimism is high, and it's pretty clear that that is buttressing the president's approval ratings, keeping them at least very steady. The folks opposed to him are a little bit less optimistic, but even they think the economy is pretty good.
All right. Thank you both. We'll be right back.